She wouldn't tell that part of the story, even though it was integral to the actual happening of it. She'd pick up the telling of it a couple of years later when she'd open her own business, but before she'd moved into her own offices. She did everything, writing up contracts, contacting owners and lenders, working even a couple times to convince Ben to lend a couple or two money for their down payments before she could use herself out of her own money. She did stagings of homes herself. She had various props for the families coming in, toy play sets to put up in living rooms or dens if a family looking to buy had kids, dummy kitchen appliances she'd bought from an old theater that was going out of business in San Antonio, and a hi-fi unit she'd listened to the Bee Gees on when she was pregnant, which had by then become obsolete but was still fancy, and a guitar she would keep on a stand next to it in a family room that was too stuffy for a young customer looking for a bachelor or party pad. Robin would pluck away at the strings now and then when she had to work in her home office and would let him in. It was off limits to him at all other times on account of an incident with some orange juice stained paperwork that he never fessed up to. She thought it was sweet, her already perceptive singing boy plinking and plonking the strings, sliding his little hand up and down the neck like it was a stand-up bass. One day, Bedla had to fit the preparations for the next day's open house between taking a young couple to view homes for sale and getting to a different open house, all while lugging a bag of toys and snacks to keep Robin mostly sated and distracted while she did her work. He was always very well behaved. He had a calm enough nature and comportment in those days before he realized how fun and satisfying trouble could be, so that it wasn't too big a burden on Bedla to have him around. His presence had even managed to be an asset on more than one occasion when buyers' poker faces were softened by his presence. She turned the TV on in their living room for Robin and gave him a cookie as a reward for having been so well behaved while they drove the buyers around town. The room was in utter chaos, or at least as much chaos as Bedla ever allowed in her home. Objects from two separate stagings were in different corners of the room. Bedla left them out as she was about to use one and had recently come to the decision that moving into an office space and hiring help was a necessity, as her business was certainly booming. She had to run to her office to file her notes and add putting in an offer for the buyers she'd just left on her schedule. Then to the kitchen to grab from the fridge the trays of cookie dough she would put in the oven at the house she and Robin would head to. She took care of all of that, got the cookie trays and Robin's travel bag. In the car, all she needed to do was grab Robin and put him in the car and head over to the open house. When she walked into the living room, she heard the familiar sound of Robin plunking away at the strings of the guitar. She paid no particular attention to the sound because she did not expect for it to be music. It wasn't even the sound of the music that made her realize what was happening. It was the intense focus on Robin's face, how he seemed to be communing with the musical instrument. She stopped in her tracks and did a double take at the side of him when she caught on to what he was playing. It was rudimentary, one string slide, da-na-na-na-na, 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 but unmistakably 25 or 6 to 4 by Chicago. When Bedla realized what she was hearing, what Robin was doing, she jumped back a bit. The simple riff was all Robin had, but he kept at it, even going so far as to try it on a different string, which produced a strange discordance as the guitar was nowhere near in tune. This is the real problem. More than proud, Bedla was impressed. That couldn't be normal. Everyone thinks their kids are special, but this actually was. So previously convinced had Bedla been of Robin's specialness that she didn't really think too deeply about how monumental it would be that he, 4 months shy of his 3rd birthday, could play like that by ear. She was proud, of course, but she didn't know yet what that moment foretold. She didn't know what it meant about Robin's connection to music, his preternatural ability at it. Right there, in the same living room where she'd had her first panic attack, on the same floor he had fallen down onto, Robin revealed to his mother something big, too big for her to see. The moment was special, sure. He was special, though that had never been in doubt, but Robin had revealed to Bedla what his destiny was meant to be. It was music. Of course it was. She'd named him and his brother after musicians, twins who were part of a family that created sweet beauty in bitterly dark world, a world of fools breaking them down. She played the music right into her belly. No day went by when she didn't play music. Bee Gees, Frampton, the Beatles, Freddie Fender, Chicago. Of course it was music. Robin had a gift, and Bedla had given it to him. The Beatles gave her the world in 1963. and she had turned around and given it to her son. There in the living room at the foot of the fireplace, Robin was showing her on that untuned guitar that he'd received it. I came into the living room, Bedla said, and Robin was playing Mom. Rob's tone was harsher than most people were used to hearing, directed from a son to a mother, and sometimes he forgot to soften it around outsiders. Heidi, the girl Rob had brought home to take back to his room one afternoon when he thought his mother would be in the office, shot Rob a look that said no matter how punk he wanted her to be, no matter how hardcore she was in dress or spirit, some lines shouldn't be crossed like he just crossed with his mother. If only she'd known. Fine, Rob. Rob was playing the guitar. It was a song by Chicago. Do you know Chicago? When Heidi shook her head, Bedla continued. They were one of my favorite bands. I played them all the time. It was a song by Chicago, 25 or 6 to 4. A real rock and roller. Rob wanted to die just then. He told his mom he was going to play some songs for Heidi, which he might have at some point, but that wasn't the plan. Bedla seemed to take his mention of the music as a cue to make the moan about herself. She didn't mention the couple they'd taken to tour homes before, or the open house they were late to after. She just said, back when I was starting my business, I had all kinds of stuff here at the house because I hadn't bought my offices. For young customers, I had a hi-fi old guitar I put in homes, and off she went. And I was just floored when I came in and Rob was playing the song. He was two. Can you believe that? Heidi looked at Rob with real affection in her eyes. If he had let her, his mother would have sealed the deal for him that afternoon like he had for her so many times over the course of business when he was in tow. All that Rob could feel in that moment was the heat behind his neck and ears, anticipating that his mother was about to go into the story of his name. I can't, Miss Betta. It's pretty impressive, Heidi told her. I know he doesn't like that old music now. I mean, he's so good at guitar, I can't even believe he ever started with that song, but that's what he had around him, those oldies, Chicago, Beatles, the Bee Gees. Did you know that's how Robin got his name? I bet he didn't tell you that. Again, Heidi looked over at Rob. It was still affectionate, but now it was playful too. Rob, however, did not feel playful. He felt exposed and judged and pushed to the edge because even then at 16, it wasn't often that Rob wasn't in control of almost any situation he was in. Having heard the story again and again, Rob waited for his cue. Well, like I said, all those old bands, they just meant so much to me. I would listen to the records any free chance I got when I was young. I used to sing these songs for my dad and his friends. He would sit me on his knee and even stand me on the table, and I would just sing big and loud for anyone who would listen. He didn't make much money, but one day he went to Montgomery Ward and bought me a suitcase record player that I just adored. He bought me a couple children's records and a Hank Williams record. It may have been the happiest day of my life, except when Rob was born, of course. She lied there. Of course she did. The story sounded better that way. I still have that record player, but by the time I was pregnant with Rob, it was all busted up and the arm had fallen off a couple times, so when it broke off again, Dr. Vetta, Rob's dad, he said he would get it fixed. When he came home that night, he said he wasn't able to. They no longer had the part. I was crushed. I actually cried, but right behind him was a delivery truck. We were always scrimping and saving so he could open up his own office, but he went out and bought me a beautiful hi-fi record player. I fell in love with all my music over again, listening to them over and over on the fancy new system. When I went to get my 3-month checkup, the doctor heard 2 heartbeats. It was twins. I remembered an article I'd read in Rolling Stone about the Bee Gees, who I liked well enough, but this was right before Saturday Night Fever, when they were really blowing up huge. I remember it, and when their next single came out, I bought it and couldn't stop listening to it over and over. I looked at the liner notes. The twins were Robin and Maurice, so the names, it felt right. I just loved the song so much. I bought all their old records, even ordered a couple that hadn't been released in America. I became obsessed, and I just listened to that song over and over. I would listen to the nice speakers, but so my voice would love it too. I plugged in the headphones and put them right to my belly and played How Deep Is Your Love over and over again for my Robin and Maurice. And maybe that's why Maurice killed himself in there. Robin looked hard in his mother's eyes and pointed at her baby. Maybe he heard that piece of shit dickless disco ballad one time too many and decided to hang himself on his umbilical cord. This was where Fedla would have mentioned Maurice, would have mentioned briefly the tragedy of losing him, but emphasized how lucky they were to have Rob. She would have remembered to say this time. She would likely have gone off to the office or to a home to meet prospective buyers, but she stood there, gut punched, her eyes pouring like faucets that were turned on the exact moment Rob finished his attack. Rob walked out of the kitchen, where they had all been standing around the island counter for his room where his guitar and his drugs and his bed were. Shocked, Heidi had no choice but to follow him. She seemed to shake off the stupor of having just seen a boy crush his mostly pleasant mother in 2 sentences. She grabbed him by his shoulder and spun him around. "What the fuck was that?" she demanded. Rob just pointed in the direction of the room they just left, unable to talk for his fury at her having made him do what he just did. If he'd been crying like he was minutes away from being, maybe Heidi would have spared him. She certainly wasn't going to fuck him. Not anymore, but maybe she wouldn't have done what she ended up doing, but he wasn't crying. He had angry fire in his eyes when he pointed with all of his impotent fury at the wall that separated them from the kitchen and stammered an angry, "Fuck her!" Clearly in that moment Rob's words failed him. His emotions had just failed him. His ego had. If he could see past the anger he didn't understand, past the sadness that undergirded it, like it did with everything else he did, he could explain why what she was doing led to what he said, why her robbery of his own ability to write his own story, to be his own person, pissed him off and made him so weak as to need to hurt, if only. He didn't have that in him. He just had failure upon failure at being someone he wanted to be, someone he wouldn't look back on later and hate. He had that, and a failure to see Heidi's overhand right coming at him, knocking him down and for a moment out. From the ground, Rob could hear Heidi storm out. She stopped at the kitchen for a beat, and for all Rob could tell, she could have hugged his mother or stood and waited for words that wouldn't come, but he would never know. He would never see Heidi again. She was a singer in a punk band, a high school dropout, who lived and breathed her music and the lifestyle that surrounded it, who had tattooed the words "fuck" and "you" across her fists with a needle and some Indian ink, and had inserted safety pins into the cartilage around her right ear by hand, and she was disgusted by how Rob had treated his mother. Rob pulled himself up and slammed the door to his bedroom behind him. He looked at himself in the mirror above the dresser and saw a thin stream of blood tracing the left side of his face. It wasn't the blood. It wasn't the pain at having been hit or the realization that he'd made a complete childish fool of himself in front of Heidi that made him cry. He knew how badly he'd hurt his mother, and he knew it wasn't because of any story about his name or how he learned to play the guitar. What made him act that way? What pain or emptiness was there in him that made him lash out? He'd heard his mother's excuses for him before. He knew she chalked it all up to that first loss, but that loss was hers. Maurice was her dead son more than he was ever Rob's dead brother. He was just another story that Rob had gotten tired of hearing, but could that have been it? Could he have been set up to need to burn the world down around him from birth? Rob didn't know. He wasn't really trying to figure out who he was. He was already too wrapped up in hating himself to try and figure out why. Now, when he brought Maria home for the first time, of course, Bella again shared the story. They sat in the living room having coffee after a big dinner. The guitar was there. And Rob didn't realize how unarmed he had been made either by Maria or by time having passed, or both, and by the fact that he was in that place where he used to feel so much darkness, for once feeling light. He walked over to the guitar that hung from the stand in Bella's Rob Shine corner, framed with 3 separate letters and the envelopes that had once contained them, naming Rob, among many other songwriters and producers, as a nominee for Grammys, each for hip-hop songs that had sampled his playing and had obligatorily named him as a co-writer. Yet, as well as clippings from the Corpus Christi Caller-Times, Weekender sections which mentioned Rob as being a native of the city when he visited, and one feature done in the Caller-Times about Rob and the band that he'd been in after he'd quit the conservatory in San Francisco. He picked up the guitar, got to quick, easy work of tuning it by ear, strummed a few simple chords. "My God, this is a shitty guitar," he said, not looking up from his noodling. "Oh, hush," Bella said. "It was only ever meant to be a prop." Rob chuckled here. He stopped his playing fluid and intricate as it ever was on any guitar, and plunked out the opening riff to 25 or 6/4. Here he looked up at his mother, and the warmth of how loved he made her feel in that moment was the kind of warmth he hoped he could keep kindled and stoked from there to forever, in the hope that some amount of it might retroactively erase how unnecessarily cold he'd been to her in the past. Bella gasped sharp and short, and pulled her open palms to her chest like she was trying to squeeze the memory. Her eyes watered and happy chuckles bounced off her shoulders up and down. She caught Maria sitting in the spot, albeit on a new couch, several living room furniture iterations later, where she collapsed 3 decades earlier and fought against a brain-embodied rebellion to gather what strength she needed to smash a lamp. You know that song? Bedla asked her. I've heard it before, I think, on the radio maybe. When Rob was only 2 years old, I came in here and I heard him playing that song. It's a song I used to listen to a lot. Chicago, the band, one of my favorites. And I guess he picked it up. That's when I knew he was special. Rob kept playing, not turning to look at his mother, or the woman he knew he loved, but whose future with him remained a scary, exciting mystery. It's about doing so much coke you don't know what time of night it is, he said over his shoulder. Robin, Bedla said in admonition. She held her hands over her mouth like a child might, accidentally cursing in front of their parents. Maria ignored this. What? Rob laughed. It was the 70s. Bedla looked relieved. He's right, it was from the 70s. I had the biggest record collection, the biggest. I collected since I was a kid. I still have all of them. Most of them are in storage. I keep some here though, even though I haven't had a turntable in years. Music meant so much to me. I would listen to records every day and night. I knew I was playing it for him, but I didn't know he would pick it up like that. He was 2. Well, that's how he got his name, right? From a band, the Bee Gees? Maria wasn't trying to endear herself to Bedla. She wasn't trying to do the hard work of making Bedla love her son any more than she did, and she loved him with all of her heart, or to make Rob feel at all worthy of that love. She was just continuing a conversation with all of her cards on the table, and with a heart open to the possibility of love happening, not because she necessarily needed to be loved, but because she lived a life that made her constantly hunger for evidence of love, true and uncomplicated, existing in the world. Bedla was stunned. She turned to Rob, and the silence of her anticipating his gaze made him turn to face her. He gave her a look and a half shrug that said, sure, I told her. And it's not a big deal, and of course I told her I love her. Maria would always remember Bedla as having been kind and warm, but it was that moment after Rob gave her that shrug that she would recall as having been when Bedla stopped treating her like a welcome guest, another girl, not unlike the weird-looking ones with crude tattoos and too many holes in their faces he would bring back when he lived in town, and started treating her like a daughter. He was a twin. I didn't know he told you that. When I found out I was having twins, I already liked the Bee Gees enough, but I found out that the 2 of them were twins. How silly is that, naming your kids after band people and the Bee Gees? But I was young and it felt right. But it wasn't just that they were twins, and 2 of the Bee Gees were. When I was more than halfway done with my pregnancy, it was summer. I was carrying twins. I was miserable. I was really trying to do anything I could to keep peace of mind, so I would go to the record store and get new singles and albums I liked. There was a song, How Deep Is Your Love? I know that one. Maria was hanging on every one of Bedla's words. My mom loved that movie. Yes, the movie. This was before it even came out. I just love that song so much. It sounded to me like a song for me and my boys, like they were this blessing that was going to come, and they were going to save me, and I was going to love them. And even if the whole world was against us, I would love them forever. Bedla was invigorated by the prospect of being asked to tell the story, by having an audience request a golden oldie. Maria sank a bit in her seat and couldn't hide her longing for her brother and the mother she never had, for a woman who needed her as a blessing and a savior, who would have fought the world for her. Rob stopped playing. He couldn't hide behind his music, or even hold the guitar up to protect his vital organs. He'd never heard this part of it. I truly fell in love with that song. I was obsessed with it, and it clicked. The twins, mine, theirs. So I named them Robin and Maurice. And I wore that single out. I wore it out. Even when the soundtrack came out, I just played that song over and over. I would put it on the hi-fi and plug in the headphones. Rob had to turn away here. I would put the headphones on my belly. I probably ruined them, but who cares? I would play that song over and over again for my Robin and my Maurice. Rob, of course, didn't make the same joke here. Dick or not, he never really wanted to make his mother cry. He just stared at the wall in front of him, but again, she waited for him to look back at her so she could show him that she forgave him and that she loved him. Rob didn't feel, probably wasn't, worthy of such love and forgiveness, but Bedla gave it because she had learned that she could look back on all the pain of life and either crumble under the weight of its psychic burdens or repackage it, dust it off, and salvage it from bitter anger and salvage herself from it. She lived the pain of the moment, so now she could look back at hindsight's scars and use them to show the world that it hadn't beaten her. She borne life's slings and arrows, and she turned them into strength and love. She chose grace because unanswered whys are maddening. Grace was losing, and choosing to ignore the score and keep playing. Grace was telling that story in that living room and remembering the pain of its last telling, and seeing Robin shrink at remembering how he'd hurt her, and sink further when he recognized the memory in his mother's eye, and waiting there like she'd waited all those nights when he'd go out and come home at all hours in various states of inebriation, so she could see him and hold him and forgive him again and again and again, like she did that evening in the soft glow of the living room with his future wife. I lost my Maurice, but I kept my Robin, my sweet and beautiful Robin. The tears that fell couldn't dampen the smile that she beamed at her son. Rob was frozen in his tracks, the guitar ridiculous and inadequate in his hands. He could have scored the moment, but he didn't know how to rise to the occasion. Maria got up and sat right next to Bella on the couch. She put an arm around her, and the woman fell right into her embrace. I had a twin too, Maria confessed. You did? Bella asked. Did? Maybe I do, I don't know. I was born in Mexico. My parents couldn't afford us both. Ay, mija. The Spanish came to Bella's lips quickly. Spanish she no longer used on a daily basis, as there were now whole days when there were whole days that went by when she and Ben wouldn't talk. That's just so terrible. No one ever really understood what to make of the truth of Maria when she revealed it to them. Mostly they scanned her eyes to gauge how much the truth hurt her, so they could give a commensurate amount of pity. Bella, sitting there in her own tears, hurting over her own loss, did not hesitate to declare the situation to be as terrible as it was. Maria appreciated this. You don't know them. You don't have your story. I'm so sorry. Bella did a strange swim move where she effortlessly shifted from being sunken into Maria's embrace to one where she was holding her, stroking her hair in one quick motion. I'm so sorry, she said to the top of Maria's head, but let me tell you, I'm more sorry for your mom than I am for you. Look at you, you're a lawyer. You're a strong woman. And she doesn't get to see that. It makes me so sad. It breaks my heart. Because I can guarantee you, she dreams about you. I can guarantee you that she misses you like part of her got chopped off. That she dreams about you, imagining what you would look like, the woman you would be. I'm so sorry you went through what you went through, I really am. But my heart just breaks for your mom. The evening fell apart there. Rob looked over at his mother and the love of his life, the mushy mess they'd made of each other. There was nothing he could say or do for either of them that they hadn't already taken care of themselves. Maria was there, loved and seemed like she hadn't been in maybe ever, and his mother was there, happy as any woman ever let to use her wisdom and pain to heal someone else, young and innocent. There was nothing for him to do but take a seat at the end of the couch, opposite the two most important people in his life, but put the guitar that kept slipping out of tune back in and make that cheap piece of shit sing more beautifully than it had any right to.